I still remember the day my son bought the mansion, even though I wasn't invited to see it. I didn't hear about it from him. I heard it from the neighbors, from church whispers, from a smiling woman at the grocery store who congratulated me as if I had been standing beside him when he signed the papers. She said my son's name with admiration, like he had climbed some invisible ladder and reached a place most people never would. I smiled politely, thanked her, and kept walking, even though my chest tightened with something that felt heavier than sadness. It felt like erasure. My son used to call me every Sunday. Not long conversations, but enough to make me feel included. Enough to make me feel remembered. Somewhere along the line, those calls stopped. At first, I blamed his work, his growing family, his busy life. I told myself that success demands attention, and mothers like me should learn to stay quiet. I practiced that silence well. I wore it like a coat. When the photos started appearing online, I finally understood. The house wasn't just big. It was enormous. Tall gates. A sweeping driveway. Balconies that caught the light just right. He stood there in a tailored suit, arm around his wife, smiling like a man who believed he had built everything on his own. Friends gathered around them, glasses raised. I studied the picture longer than I should have. Not because of the house, but because of the empty space where I should have been standing. He didn't invite me to the housewarming. Didn't even mention the purchase. I learned the address from someone else. That hurt more than I expected. Not because I wanted to walk through marble halls or admire chandeliers, but because it confirmed something I had been trying not to name. My son didn't want me in the story of his success. I was a chapter he believed he had already closed. What he didn't know, what no one knew, was that the land beneath that mansion had a history far older than his ambition. A history tied quietly, legally, and unshakably to me. I didn't react right away. I've lived long enough to know that timing is everything. Shock makes people reckless. Silence makes them reveal themselves. So I waited. I watched. I listened. I let my son talk about his house in interviews and conversations I overheard secondhand. I let him tell stories about how hard he worked, how he took risks, how he finally made it. Each word stacked higher, like bricks placed carelessly on a foundation he didn't fully understand. At night, I sat at my kitchen table, the same one where I once helped him with homework, and traced my fingers over documents I kept in a folder older than his marriage. The paper had yellowed with time, but the ink was strong. Legal language doesn't age the way people do. It waits. Patient. Certain. I wasn't angry. That's what surprised me most. I felt calm. Grounded. Like someone standing at the edge of a river, watching the current rush forward, knowing exactly where it would eventually bend. People think power looks loud. They think it demands attention. But real power often sits quietly, unnoticed, until it decides to speak. My son and I weren't always distant. There was a time when he relied on me for everything. After his father passed, it was just the two of us. I worked long hours, took extra shifts, and learned how to stretch money in ways that felt like magic. I never called it sacrifice. I called it love. He used to sit at the counter while I paid bills, watching me circle numbers and calculate totals. I taught him early that ownership mattered, that signatures mattered, that land was more than dirt, it was security. The property in question had come into my life quietly, through a chain of events most people would have dismissed as luck. My aunt, a woman with no children of her own, left me a parcel of land decades ago. Back then, it sat on the outskirts of town, undeveloped and overlooked. People laughed when I refused to sell. They told me I was foolish, sentimental, stuck in the past. I smiled and kept the deed. Years passed. The city expanded. Roads stretched. Suddenly, that forgotten land sat in the path of growth. Developers came knocking. I said no. Not because I didn't need the money, but because I understood something they didn't. Timing. When my son started talking about investing, about real estate, about building something big, I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't remind him of my experience. Mothers my age learn quickly that advice sounds like criticism to ambitious ears. When he mentioned a development opportunity, I recognized the description immediately. Same landmarks. Same boundaries. Same land. He never asked if I owned it. He assumed I didn't. Through a series of intermediaries, shell agreements, and legal maneuvering, the land was leased in a way that benefited everyone involved. Everyone except the one person who didn't know the full story. My son built his mansion believing the ground beneath it belonged to the deal he signed. He never questioned the deeper layers. He trusted the surface. Watching him celebrate felt strange. Pride and distance tangled together in my chest. I was proud of his drive, his confidence, his belief in himself. But I was also aware of how quickly success can turn into arrogance when people forget where they come from. He spoke about independence as if it were something he invented, as if no one had steadied him along the way. Still, I stayed quiet. I attended family gatherings when invited. I brought gifts. I asked polite questions. I listened to stories about the house I had never seen in person. Each time, someone would say, "You must be so proud," and I would nod, even though the words felt incomplete. Late at night, alone, I wondered if he would ever ask me why I wasn't impressed. Why I didn't ask for a tour. Why I didn't gush. But he never noticed. He was too busy living in a version of the world where I was no longer central. I didn't blame him. Life teaches us to look forward, not back. But life also has a way of reminding us that foundations matter. And the foundation of his mansion, both literal and figurative, rested on something he didn't fully understand. The invitation never came, not even months later. No casual "Mom, you should stop by sometime." No acknowledgement that I might want to see the place he was so proud of. That silence spoke louder than any words. It told me where I stood. Or rather, where I didn't. I heard about the lavish parties through mutual acquaintances. Live music, catered food, guests wandering through rooms named after their functions, media room, wine room, guest wing. People said the house felt like a statement. Like proof. My son liked that word. Proof. Proof that he had made it. Proof that he didn't need anyone anymore. What they didn't see was how carefully he avoided mentioning me. In conversations, my name disappeared. When it did surface, it was usually as an afterthought. "My mom's doing fine," he'd say, quickly, before redirecting the conversation back to himself. I paid attention to these things because silence sharpens observation. When you stop being invited into people's lives, you start seeing them clearly. I noticed how his stories always positioned him as self-made. How he framed his journey as solitary. How he spoke about risk as if no one had ever carried him through uncertain years. One afternoon, I received a letter from a legal office. Routine. Informational. Nothing alarming. I placed it beside my tea and stared out the window for a long time before opening it. The land had appreciated again. New developments nearby. Increased valuation. I smiled softly. Numbers have a way of speaking their own truth, even when people ignore them. I thought about calling my son. Thought about telling him everything. Thought about ending the distance with honesty. But something held me back. Not bitterness. Not revenge. Clarity. He needed to learn something first. About humility. About assumptions. About the cost of forgetting the people who laid the groundwork for your success. So I waited. The first crack appeared when a zoning issue delayed one of his expansion plans. He complained loudly, frustrated that things weren't moving as smoothly as he expected. He blamed bureaucracy, incompetence, bad timing. He never considered that the issue might be rooted deeper. I listened quietly when he vented, offering neutral responses. I didn't correct him. Then came the financial strain. Maintaining a mansion costs more than people expect. Staff. Maintenance. Taxes. Appearances. He started making comments about cash flow, about needing things to align. I heard stress creep into his voice for the first time in years. Still, he didn't ask for help. Pride kept him upright, even as the ground beneath him subtly shifted. I wasn't enjoying his discomfort. That's important to understand. This wasn't about punishment. It was about balance. About reminding someone that independence doesn't mean isolation, and success doesn't erase history. One evening, as I reviewed the original documents again, I realized the moment was approaching. Not because he was failing, but because he was finally listening. Pressure has a way of opening ears. And when the time came, The truth would land harder because of the silence that came before it. The call came later than I expected. He didn't start with an apology or concern. He started with logistics. "Mom," he said, "do you still have those old papers from Aunt Clara's estate?" His tone was casual, but I could hear the tension beneath it. The question itself told me everything. He was close enough to the truth to feel it, but not close enough to see it clearly. I told him I did. I didn't ask why. Silence does more work than curiosity when someone is already uneasy. He explained, vaguely, that there were complications with the land. That some historical ownership records were being reviewed. That lawyers were involved. He spoke carefully, like someone walking across thin ice. I listened, stirring my tea, letting the clink of the spoon fill the space between his words. "What kind of papers?" he asked. "The original deed," I said. "And the amendments." There was a pause. Longer than any pause we'd shared in years. He laughed lightly, trying to shake off the weight of it. "I don't think that's related," he said, too quickly. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. After we hung up, I sat quietly, thinking about the boy he used to be. The one who trusted me completely. The one who believed I knew things worth knowing. Somewhere along the way, success had convinced him that wisdom only moves forward, never backward. He had forgotten that roots matter. The lawyers reached out soon after. Formal. Polite. Careful. They asked questions I answered without elaboration. They reviewed documents I provided without commentary. Professionals recognize certainty when they see it. There was no confusion on their end. The land story was clear. I imagined my son pacing his office, trying to make sense of things that didn't align with his understanding. I imagined the mansion, solid and beautiful, resting on legal truths older than his ambition. The image didn't bring me satisfaction. It brought me resolve. When he finally asked to meet, his voice sounded different. Softer. Less certain. We agreed on a neutral place. A quiet cafe. Not his house. Not mine. Some truths need neutral ground. He arrived early. I could tell. He always did when he was nervous. When I sat down across from him, I saw the strain in his face. The confidence was still there, but it had cracks now. He started to speak, then stopped. I waited. "Why didn't you tell me?" he finally asked. I looked at him calmly. "You never asked." The words weren't sharp. They were factual. They hung between us, heavy with years of unspoken assumptions. I explained everything then. The land. The history. The agreements. The reasons I stayed silent. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't accuse. I simply told the truth, start to finish. His face shifted with every sentence, disbelief giving way to understanding, then to something deeper. Recognition. He realized, in that moment, that his success wasn't as solitary as he believed. That the ground beneath his greatest achievement belonged, in a very real sense, to the woman sitting across. He didn't interrupt me. That surprised me. My son has always liked control, especially over conversations. But this time, he listened. Fully. His hands were clasped tightly on the table, knuckles pale, eyes fixed on mine as if he were afraid the truth might disappear if he looked away. When I finished, the cafe felt quieter. Or maybe my world did. He exhaled slowly, like someone releasing a weight he hadn't known how to name. "So, what happens now?" he asked. That question told me more than anything else. Not anger. Not denial. Just uncertainty. For the first time in years, he wasn't standing on solid ground. "That depends," I said gently. "On what you think this is about." He frowned. "Isn't it obvious?" I shook my head. "You think this is about ownership. About control. About who holds the cards. It's not." He leaned back slightly, studying me. "Then what is it about?" I held his gaze. Respect. The word landed differently than he expected. I could see it. He had prepared himself for legal arguments, financial negotiations, even conflict. He hadn't prepared for that. "I never wanted your house," I continued. "I never wanted credit. I wanted acknowledgement. Inclusion. The courtesy of being remembered." He looked down at the table, jaw tight. "I didn't mean to shut you out." "I know," I said. And I meant it. But intention doesn't erase impact. We talked for a long time after that. About his childhood. About the years after his father died. About the sacrifices neither of us ever named. The conversation felt like reopening a door that had been quietly closed, not slammed shut, just forgotten. He admitted something then that I hadn't expected. He said he had been afraid. Afraid that if he acknowledged my role, his success would feel smaller. Less his. That fear had shaped his choices more than pride ever did. I listened. Understanding doesn't require agreement. It requires openness. When we stood to leave, he hesitated. Can I show you the house?" he asked. The invitation came late, but it came honestly. I smiled, not because I needed to see the mansion, but because the boy I raised was finally standing in front of me again, stripped of illusions. "Soon," I said. "Not today." He nodded. He understood. Some things can't be rushed. As I walked home, I felt lighter. Not because I had one, but because the truth had finally surfaced. The land, the house, the documents, they were tools. The real foundation had always been something else. Relationship. Memory. Respect. And now that foundation had been repaired, at least enough to hold what came next. The weeks that followed were quieter. My son didn't post as much online. The mansion still stood, still impressive, but it no longer felt like a monument to separation. It felt human. Complicated. Like all things built on real histories. He started calling again. Not out of obligation, but curiosity. He asked questions. About the past. About decisions I made. About things he had never bothered to understand before. Each conversation stitched something back together, slowly, carefully. The legal matters resolved themselves cleanly. There was no public drama. No scandal. Just clarity. The land remained legally tied to me, with agreements that protected everyone involved. My son accepted this without argument. That told me the lesson had landed. One afternoon, I finally visited the mansion. He walked beside me through rooms designed to impress, watching my reactions closely. I didn't comment much. I didn't need to. Houses, no matter how grand, are just structures. What matters is who feels welcome inside them. When we reached the back terrace, overlooking the land stretching beyond the gates, I paused. He followed my gaze. "This view," I said softly, "is why I never sold." He nodded. "I see that now." We stood there together, not as owner and guest, not as victor and humbled, but as mother and son, both aware of the quiet truth beneath our feet. He never announced publicly that I owned the land. He didn't need to. The change showed up in other ways. Invitations. Acknowledgement. Space made intentionally. Respect given without being demanded. People still talk about his mansion. They always will. But what they don't talk about is the foundation they can't see. The patience. The silence. The woman who waited, not to be noticed, but to be understood. And he still doesn't know everything. Some things are better left as quiet knowledge, held gently, not used as leverage. Power doesn't need witnesses to exist. What matters is that when my son walks across his polished floors now, he does so with awareness. Of where he came from. Of who stood behind him when no one was watching. Of the land beneath him and the history that made his success possible. If there's one thing age teaches you, it's that not every truth needs to arrive like a storm. Some arrive like rain, slow and steady, soaking into the ground until everything changes. I still live in the same modest house. I still drink my tea at the same kitchen table. Nothing outwardly dramatic shifted in my life after the revelation. But something inside settled. A quiet alignment between past and present. My son visits more now. Sometimes with his wife. Sometimes alone. He listens differently. That alone is worth more than any mansion. He asks for my opinion, not as a formality, but as guidance. He no longer assumes the world began when he stepped into it. The land remains mine. Legally. Symbolically. It always was. Not because I needed control, but because I understood stewardship. Ownership isn't about dominance. It's about responsibility. I don't regret staying silent. Silence taught us both something. It taught him humility. It taught me patience. And when the truth finally emerged, it did so without destroying anything. It revealed instead of ruined. People ask me sometimes if I ever felt tempted to use the situation differently, to make a point, to force acknowledgement sooner. I smile and tell them no. Rushed lessons don't last. Quiet ones do. My son still lives in his mansion. He still hosts gatherings. But now, when people ask about his journey, he mentions me. Not as a footnote. As a foundation. That's all I ever wanted. And he still doesn't know every detail of how carefully everything unfolded. He doesn't need to. What matters is that the ground beneath him feels solid again, not because he owns it, but because he finally understands it.